Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today in this episode where we're going to be exploring the idea of migration, especially when people would say, why can't they just stay where they are born? I believe that that is a very interesting view to take because I was doing a little bit of digging today and I wanted to kind of understand this whole history of migration and when it all began. And according to some research, it says that it was about 2 million years ago it began. There are arguments that it began a little bit earlier than that. But the point of it for me in wanting to understand this is that the idea of migration has never been so divisive as it is right now. I believe that there is a place and an argument for some of the issues that people currently face. Yes, for example, lack of resources such as hospitals, schools, adequate roads, lightings or electricity, and all of that. Yes, there is an argument for that when you have too much influx of people, these services would be affected. But there is also another argument, I believe, that this idea of positive migration when it suits, the media would often, which is where it tends to come from, push this as a way or refuse to actually push it if it is needed to say we need these people to fill the gaps in whatever sector or industry that it is required. But when it doesn't suit, then you get the hatred, the guilt tripping, and the divisiveness, where you then highlight the gaps within the system. So, for example, some of the arguments that I've often heard is that when migrants enter a place, they take all the jobs. They are the reason why you cannot use your hospitals and there is a backlog. They're the reason why you haven't got adequate resources such as policing, housing. Isn't that interesting that these arguments around housing, policing, and all of the other resources such as doctor's appointments or medical treatment and all of that gets tied in with migrants when there's the argument of the day, but when it isn't, it is conveniently left behind and the focus becomes about those specific issue. The issue around housing has been one that's been going on for a long time, especially here in the UK. There have been a shortage of housing projects for a very long time. This is not something to do with people coming into the country or not coming into the country. It is just basically because the government have not met its target, which they consistently set for themselves to say we're going to build X amount of houses by this time. If that is the catchy phrase of the day, then that's what they're going to go with. The idea of doctor's appointment. I remember back in 2010, I believe, when the whole idea of austerity kicked in here in the UK. I remember me and a few of my friends talking about how people are gonna get heavily affected by all of this. At that time, the government were all about, oh yeah, we need to cut back on resources and we need to ensure that we're able to balance the books. Those were the phrase of the time. And at that time, it was argued that Labour had overspent and they had bankrupted the country. Yes, whilst there may have been an argument to say something needed to be done in terms of balancing the books, completely understand that, and in terms of cutting back and making sure that you tailor your purse according to what you can afford. Yes, there's an argument for that. However, during this period, there was already shortages to resources that people were using. They couldn't use these resources. There was already issues with medical treatment. There was already issues with housing. There was already issues with available sort of centers for our young people, teaching staff. We already were struggling with all of these issues. But what happened next, I believe, made things even worse. Cutting back on resources that were already stretched wasn't gonna in any way make things better. Instead, it would make it worse. Surely, I want to believe that that was common sense, right? So how do you leap from that struggle caused or compounded by austerity very quickly into migration? Where does that fit in? Yes, like I pointed out initially, migration does have his downfalls. Yes, I believe that we're not adequately controlled. There is an issue that its environment faces. I suppose something else that we need to also consider is that people, regardless of where they're born, don't just wake up one day and say, I want to leave my country, I want to leave my family, and that's it. A lot of the time, it is something or a situation that they find themselves that is beyond their control. And some of these things are poor leadership, hunger, wars, and people being unjustly persecuted wherever it is that they're from. Sometimes people are fleeing these persecutions and hoping to be able to go to a place where they can be free, or they can at least taste freedom. There is an argument, some would say, that during the time where the West were so focused on taking over the rest of the world, migration was considered to be positive at that time because there was great benefit to the West. However, the tables have now turned around, and these same people that were fine with it at that time are now against migration. It's quite selective, isn't it? The resources that people went seeking for, that was taken away from these countries, sometimes has left them at a disadvantage, because in some areas the tools required to be able to gain access to these resources are not there, or if they are, they're not functioning. In the instances where they are, it's either they are being controlled by a system that is not filtering it down to its citizens. Some might argue that, so if the government or the system are refusing to filter it out to a citizen, why is that my problem? And to a certain extent, I can see that. But if we are citizens of the world, which we are and should be, then we should be concerned when another citizen or system is abusing its people. Surely, right? We can't be selective and say this person matters when a system oppresses them and is posted all over social media. We can't be selective when people are gunned down by somebody or a system that is posted all over social media. We can't be selective when a government steals things from their own country and come and develop your system here, and it's posted all over social media, and you're calling for that government to be removed because it is unfair. But when this is not being widely reported and its citizens are actually saying this is what we're going through and it is the reason we're trying to leave, then all of a sudden we kind of turn our back and say we don't want to hear it. If, I believe, as a society, as a human race, we listened to one another and worked hand in hand with one another, rather than categorizing some people or some nations, like I would pick a word that was used as shithole countries, shithole continents, stood up when we need to stand up, rather than be selective about the battles that we won of battle. I give an example. There've just been recent coups taking place in Africa where the military have had to step in because they are unhappy with the governance of their country. What has the UN done? The UN is asking for the government to be reinstated, knowing fully well that these governance are not appropriate for the countries. Some of them have been in power for 10, 15, 20 years and put their kids and families in power, all to enrich themselves. It's fine when they're doing it, but it is not okay when the people then rise up and take over. Again, why are we being selective in the battles that we're trying to take on? The issue of Ukraine in recent times between Ukraine and Russia is one that reeks of favoritism, some would argue, because there are other countries where people are suffering similar issues. People are faced with similar problems where they are being tortured, their houses are being taken away from them, women and children are unable to sleep at night because they're afraid of what's going to come back to them. Men and boys are being sent to fight a battle that's not of their making, but instead but instead of the government of the time? Why is it okay to open our doors to one set of people, and it's not okay to offer the same service to the others that are going through a similar struggle? Some argue that it's got to do with race. If that's the case, is this another form of division? The story of migration dates back before a lot of our time, and it is one that has always raised questions about the system in which we all exist in. And only, I believe, by asking these critical questions of who does it benefit to keep bringing it up. In a place where there are no schools, no hospitals, no policing, why should that be the problem of the person coming in and not the problem of the system in which you exist? If that person never came in, who would be held responsible for that? Or would that be business as usual? Or would that be business as usual? Or would that be business as usual? When do we begin to hold people within the system that are in control accountable? If it is not that person coming in that can be used as a scapegoat, I can guarantee you today that somebody else would be. Because in a place where we are not divided by people coming in, we are divided by tribes. We are divided by the things that some people have and the others don't. We're divided by class. We're divided by sexes. We're divided by gender. We're divided by something. There is always something that's going to be used. And it's always that thing that's the discussion of the day. So it's important, I believe, that we don't fall victim, or most importantly, we don't become partakers of the oppression which the system is trying to place on somebody else. It is important that we know something when it comes to migration. People that are displaced are not coming here or going to the States or going to whatever system that is settled at that time because they want to claim benefit. A lot of the time, that's not the case. I say this as somebody that works with children and families on a daily basis. Whilst there might be instances where this is provided whilst they're going through an assessment period, these people, if given the opportunity, would rather work. Why is it not then considered that whilst an assessment is going on, we should offer this opportunity that people can work? That is a way to ensure that they continue to fend for themselves rather than relying on the state, because Because in some instances, you're dealing with doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, social workers. You're dealing with people that actually have the skills that you require within the system that we currently exist in, and we don't have enough of them. Isn't it interesting that when we decided to leave Europe, the shortages that we already were struggling with was further compounded? And now, what is not being spoken about is migration that we're having to sort outside of the EU. So was the issue ever about migration? If you think about that. And when, like I said, is migration okay? Because now you've got it in abundance now, a lot more that was ever there in the first place here in the UK. I can't speak for any other country out there, but I can safely say that in a place where there is shortages of skills and labor, migration is often needed, and this a lot of the time is orchestrated by the system that is telling you to hate migration. And like I've said initially, when the system orchestrates it, the media is silent until it is time to hate them again. And us as people fall for it every single time. Is it not time we start asking questions? Who's benefiting from all of this? Is it really you or me? Is the argument and constant hatred benefiting you or me? I'm going to leave it there today. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. And I look forward to hearing your side and your point of views. Again, let's keep it healthy. We're just having a conversation here. Until next time, it has been Kings. Peace. Bye for now.